Welcome to Moment by Moment Season 4. We're so excited that you guys are joining us, man. We have an awesome episode lined up. But let me just say thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for telling your family and your friends all about the Moment by Moment podcast. Let me tell you, we can't do what we do without your support. Real quick, if you don't know, we have some new merch. So go ahead and check out our merch on our website. We believe that you can have these great, awesome God-centered conversations right where you're getting your coffee, right where you're doing your grocery shopping. And when you wear clothes, I mean, you think about wearing sports clothes, I mean, that'll start a conversation, right? And so we believe the same thing can be done for shirts that represent Christ. And so, hey, we have an awesome episode ready to go. We drop episodes every Monday. So if you don't know, now you know. I have with me guests Adam and Matt. We're doing our part 2 of Apologetics. How you guys doing? You guys want to do a brief just introduction again of yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting us back.
Yes,
it is good to be here. Back. Good to be with fellow believers and some very much needed, important conversations. My name is Adam Mendez. I am the music and production minister here at Oak Hills. I've been at Oak Hills on staff for about 15 years.
Awesome.
All right, guys. It's good to be back. Thanks, JD. My name is Matt Moore. I'm the minister of adult discipleship here. Been here for 8 years and excited to be back for this really important topic, Apologetics Part 2.
This is going to be a good one. The sequel.
Don't call it a comeback.
Come on, let's get it. Well, listen, I'm excited about this one. We mentioned, I mean, these are important conversations, but what we do want to have is we want our listeners to listen and get excited, get emboldened, go do some studying, go have conversations, whatever the practical next step is. We don't want to just throw out things to sound smarter, because we know we're not experts and that's okay. We're just here having a conversation, an open conversation based off our life experience when it comes to apologetics. What has worked for us? What are we still searching? What do we want to learn more on? But what are some key important conversations that, we're having? And maybe we just hope it's a benefit and a help to you. So if you're listening, you have questions, drop some comments in there, drop us an email. Don't send us a bad email. Maybe a nice email. We get enough.
I don't get a lot of those.
I give them
I don't get enough.
Well, send all your emails to Matt. But listen, we're gonna kind of just jump into this. So the last episode, if you haven't listened to it, I'd tell you to go check it out. I think it was a great one. We gave a cursory overview of apologetics, and on this one, we're gonna take a step a little bit deeper, and we're gonna talk about some of our conversations that we've had. With people from different beliefs. There's so many ways to take apologetics. Matt, I mean, give us just a few of the schools of thought when it comes to apologetics.
Yeah, so we covered a few of these in the last episode, but the general streams of thought in apologetics are going to be moral, philosophical, scientific, historical, or archaeological sometimes. And so those are like different categories that these questions will come up in. The other way to think about those categories is faith systems or worldviews that people have and hold as they come into a conversation about faith. And so I think the first thing I generally try to do in a conversation with somebody about faith is determine kind of their starting place, right? If everybody's coming to this conversation with ideas and presuppositions or history or experiences, family background, that kind of stuff. And so they could be a different faith system altogether. They could be very churched, and so but now they've deconstructed or something like that. So determining the starting place for the conversation. So if you're in relationship with this person, you likely already know some of this stuff. But I think the best tool in apologetics is asking questions and listening well. And so that's generally how I start a conversation. What do you guys generally do when you stepping into the conversation about?
Similarly, what can we agree on?
That's good.
If we can agree on a thing, if I'm having a conversation with a Muslim, we probably already both agree that Jesus lived. Right. So that's already one step, one win. Yes. I don't have to have that argument. If I'm dealing with someone who used to be Catholic and has just completely fallen away from the faith, there may be some social structures that we even grew up with, going to church, and maybe something happened in the history at their church that actually caused them. And it's not an argument of whether or not God's real. It's more something hurt them inside. And that's what we actually need to do to defend the faith of, hey, people are going to fail. That's scriptural. Right. And so what can we agree on? That's my big thing.
Yeah. The way I've heard Tim Keller explain that is like always position the arguments of the person you're talking with in the most favorable light possible. Because that's what you want them to do for you. Yeah. Right. And so if you're earnestly like finding things to agree on, that's the best way to go about that conversation.
Yeah, for me, I have a lot of conversations, and man, definitely aligning up with what we believe. And most of my conversations are really with atheists and agnostics. So unfortunately, I don't get to start at Jesus being a real person that is in history that we can confirm. However, so that's why morality is really my starting point. But I think being able to agree on other things outside of even what we believe can be helpful. I think it's low hanging fruit for me to relate to people when it comes to sports, right? If somebody plays sports, I mean, we can chop it up about that, and we'll walk into some of these conversations. We'll walk into it from in a practical way. I love coffee, right? So I remember meeting some guys at coffee shops, and just we got on these conversations, but it was a friendly beginning. And so it wasn't a hostile, let's oppose. And then I say things in the conversation. So if we are at a definitive difference, I would say, listen, I know that I'm not an expert. I legitimately don't believe that I'm an expert. I don't want him to have the takeaway that what I'm saying is the best way to say certain things. So I try to give a precursor, and I'll even suggest different readings so that they don't feel like I'm trying to bully them with this truth. Now, what I firmly believe 100%, but I know there are better ways to say it. I know there's smarter people than me. I know there's more archaeological evidence than what I'm going to give you. I'll give you some. And so I try to give the onus on them to even do their own study. And then what I do is I say, give me materials. I've done this before. I'm like, give me some articles that you have. Let me know what you guys want me to say and or want me to read, and I'll read up on that, and then we'll meet up again. And we've done that before, and that's been really cool. So it's really just like, tell me about what you believe. Okay, I'm gonna study what you're saying, and then I want you to study what I'm saying, and then let's come back and let's convene and let's see where we're at.
Yeah, that kind of humility disarms people and helps the conversation go so much more smoothly. In my experience, most of the conversations I have like this are with family and friends who aren't Christians, and so they're people that I am going to see often. Yeah, and if it gets hostile or it gets heated or tense, like then that relationship starts to break down, and the opportunities to continue conversation are going to break down. So that's why it's really important to me, and I think it's important for anyone, whether they're a stranger or a friend, but for us to make sure that our tactics are the way that we engage. That 1 Peter 3:15 that we referenced in the last episode, is with gentleness and respect.
That's I literally just opened it up because that's the part I think we miss the most. Yeah. And we end up doing more damage than good. Respect, when you're talking to a Muslim, you're going to have to work on that, because a lot of times, especially if you've grown up in the US, there may be some animosity there that you haven't dealt with. Yeah. And if you can't respect them and their beliefs enough to talk to them in a way that is not egocentric, that is not dismissive, you're gonna lose you're gonna lose them.
Frustrated when somebody doesn't believe in what you say. Yeah. I don't know how you couldn't agree on this. Like, what do you mean? Yeah. What do you mean God's not real? Let's
I know you've been raised in another faith system, and that's 100%. Been your entire world for your whole life. And it's funny, I expect you with
Peter
one comment.
knew what he was writing, because those were going to be the two things that were going to be the hardest things to overcome when having this kind of defense: gentleness and respect. And unfortunately, those might be the two things we don't talk enough about when we're talking about apologetics.
But to your point, Adam, I do believe that people's worldview that we're having conversations with has to be taken into play. Sure. So to your point with Muslims, they grow up in a whole construct, the same way we grew up in our construct. And I think when we can admit that we grew up in our own biases, and we have to challenge our biases at times, because there are things that I have to challenge about myself that I grew up believing. Maybe it's because just sociological around me, the people that I went to school with, the people that I grew up around, even my parents, all those things you have to challenge at a certain point. Yep. I think the easiest one for us to recognize is our political views. There's a point where we have to be like, you know what? I got to make it my own. Do I believe this, or is it just because this is what I grew up hearing at home? And I think that's just a way that we have to have conversations when it comes to Christianity, and understanding that there are biases that we have, and even ways of talking about things that we have to just be able to give the same temperament that they're receiving, that we want to receive. Respect. We have to give it back.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's like a type of humility to acknowledge, hey, I come to this conversation with my own biases, with my own presuppositions, with the ideas that I inherited from either my family or my background or the people that I respect. And I've chosen to adopt those things as my own faith. But the person I'm dealing with also has all of that background, but the conclusion that they've come to might be different than my own. And so I think the work of apologetics begins not in the question that surfaces in a conversation, but starting to unpack what those biases are, and helping a person recognize, hey, I might have come to this conclusion without all the information, without all the facts. And so we have to acknowledge that for ourselves and be willing to listen and have genuine discourse and not just dismiss somebody when they bring up a valid point. And on the other hand, we start to ask questions that help probe that for them. I know, JD, you've talked about your interactions with people who are atheists, right? And that's typically who you interact with. So how do you engage that conversation to determine like the starting place for that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm an extrovert. So I don't know if you're listening right now and you're like, you know what? I'm just trembling thinking about walking up to somebody and having a conversation about faith. Like, I'm on the edge of my knowledge of my faith. I would just never do that. Let me just encourage you. God will give you the words sometimes. The Holy Spirit is real. I mean, and that's what we have to rely on. I know that my words, no matter how good I can say them and all the fancy college level words that I know, it's not going to matter. None of it matters. People will literally look at you and just be like, nah, I don't want to talk to you. Like, you're arrogant. You know, I could tell that you don't love me. You don't care about me. And so I'm not going to have a conversation with you. That being said, the conversation style that I love to get into is usually I start with something that we both agree on or disagree on, right? So sports. I love sports. My team is the Washington Redskins. I guess we're just Washington now. We're not good. So a lot of conversations I have are just me hating on other teams that are better than us, right? So, but it's low hanging fruit that people can just laugh at. And so usually it starts like that. I play a lot of, I don't know if you can tell I'm a little short, but I play basketball a lot. I love sports, man. I'll play flag football, basketball, and a lot of my conversations do stem from just on the basketball court. You just get to know people. You know, when you start, you're outside. It's San Antonio out here. It's 104 degrees. We're all dying together, talking about how much we need water. And I'm joking, I want a water break in the middle of the game. And I'm calling crazy fouls just because I'm tired, and we're all laughing. But reality is, man, I've been hooping with some guys out here for like a year, and we're starting to have real conversations about faith, about what is God? Is God love? Is God good? These conversations that, you just can't have off rip. And so there's something about having value and placing value in relationship before trying to spew knowledge on people, because that they're not going to hear it. You can tell somebody that's your friend, man, shut up. That's crazy. Right. But you go up to somebody random, first time you're having a conversation, yo, shut up. You're crazy. It's going to come across real different. Right. And so you can have these awesome conversations with people that you've already poured that just the time and that effort into. So they know that you care. So when you're saying things like, man, God is real, man, and I'm challenging them and I'm asking those questions, they're asking me questions. They're challenging me, to your point, Matt, about being open to that same, whatever you're given, you should be ready to receive. I remember a guy I was chopping it up with a couple years back. I challenged him and he was challenging me and I was challenging him. He gave me some articles. I gave him some articles. And then I challenged him. I said, all right, I'm gonna ask you to do something weird. Pray to God tonight. Like, get on your knees and pray. It's not about how you do it, but I just think it helps me to get on my knees at times to pray, because it's a position where I'm subservient to my God. And so he was like, man, that's weird. I was like, just try it, man. Just pray to God and say, God, please make yourself real to me. And I mean, and sometimes it's just those conversations of doing something and making sure that you're also, if they give you something to read it. So you can actually speak with knowledge and be able to have a conversation about it. So that's how as an extrovert goes. I mean, that's how I have conversations.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point. I don't think we've talked about this at all, but there's different personality types. And understanding your own and understanding the person across the table from you is really, really important. And that's going to take some time to really get down. But apologetics is not just for extroverts. Everybody has a sphere of influence in their lives. It may be a comic book store. It may be a basketball or a gym or something. You have a group of people that you hang out with. And if you don't, that's maybe your first red flag. Enemy's trying to isolate you and make you feel alone. So you need to kind of get out there and develop that, because the enemy is going to try to isolate you, make you feel like you're on an island. Nobody's there for you. So that's maybe almost your first hurdle in apologetics is, hey, if you feel equipped, now it's time to start going out and ministering the gospel. And then the second thing, understanding other people's personality types. This is kind of that respect and gentleness piece we were talking about. It's like, there are some people who are going to engage in that discussion, and there are some people who are going to be real put off at any kind of disagreement. And that's where that gentleness piece needs to come in. And you almost have to gauge or figure out which, we keep talking about a tool belt. Which tool am I using? Oh, wait. Maybe I need to come at a more personal level instead of a philosophical level.
Yeah. And Matt, I mean, I know that you encounter, I mean, it's cool that we all encounter different people, right? I mean, that's probably a personality, but that's also like how we grew up, where we grew up, and all of it. So it's really neat how we're all hands and feet of Jesus. We're all having different conversation styles with different people. Talk to me about, Matt, like when you're having conversations, who are you having them with? What are some of the things that you're saying?
Yeah. So for me, the first place I think of is like the Thanksgiving dinner table.
Okay.
It's not a comic book store or a basketball court. It's right. I mean, that's already a little bit tense because they're members of the family that we don't see all the time or whatever. Right. But like I'm the black sheep because I'm a Christian, because most of them are have a naturalistic worldview, or they're maybe a different faith system, or they're all over the map, but none of them are Christian other than me and my immediate family. And so this extended family really becomes the place where I start to have those interactions. And to your point about relationship, like if that relationship goes south, like that's going to make the next decade really miserable,
real
right?
Awkward,
like, and so there's a lot at stake. So I used to just like, okay, well, I'm going to avoid it. I'm afraid. I'm scared. But then I realized that there is a way to genuinely interact with my family in these conversations that's motivated by love. And so some of the ones I'm thinking about are often with folks who are like super new age spiritual, like they kind of take a little bit from over here and over there, and they've got a little bit of Buddhist thought or astrology or different things that they kind of all mesh together to become a faith system or a way that they approach life and answering the big questions of life. And so the questions I'm generally asking them are about, well, like, how did you come to that conclusion? Like, how's that reliable? Like, is that something that is unique to you and your perspective, your experience with this transcendent power, this force? They don't even talk about God, but like, okay, this energy that you seem to tap into and have experiences with. How do you understand what that is and what that isn't? Is it all based on your feelings? Is it based on something that you've read? How do you know what's reliable in your experience with this transcendent force? Because I know I question all the time, like, was that real? Did I hear that? Like even in my own experience with God, right? I've got questions, and I'm discerning whether or not that's legitimately an encounter with God, and I'm learning how to listen to his voice. And so for somebody else, and I've got the Bible, I've got consistent things that I go to. I've got orthodox teaching through thousands of years, right? If I still wrestle with being sure of the things that I'm believing, then certainly they do too. And so that gives me, I can open up about that, but I can say, but I do have a source. I do have a place that I go back to that's a reference point. Do you? And what is that? And being willing to, like you said, go engage in that and read some of the things that they've said that they were influenced by or adopted as their belief system.
It's interesting because I think some people are scared to do that, but I think it's just an insecurity in their own faith and belief system. Because I've heard people say, well, I'm not going to read that. Like, it might change my worldview, you know? Yeah. So I think it's important to have some facts in your mind and be rooted in your faith. Otherwise, you're going to be blown in the wind, as it says in the word, by every wind and doctrine that comes your way. Yeah. So be rooted in your faith before you start having these conversations. Otherwise, you might be an atheist tomorrow because you're like, man, that actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah. You know, I'm kind of being funny, but I'm also being serious though. Yeah. Being rooted in your faith is one thing. And I kind of want us to walk into some of these realistic, factual things that come up in a lot of the conversations. So generically, can we talk about the Holy Canon, right? The Bible, as we call it. I think this is something that comes up in so many conversations of different religions, because a lot of what we believe, all of what we believe hinges on this word, right?
Right.
But here it comes. If somebody doesn't believe the Bible, can you bring the Bible to them? I mean, it's going to be a moot point. There's no point in bringing a text that isn't accurate. So I think pointing to the accuracy of text when I'm having conversations with atheists and agnostics included, and different, and even Muslims and Jehovah's Witnesses and people who have extra biblical text to the Bible, I have a conversation based off of what I believe points to the truth of the Bible. And so, Adam, I know that you also do that. So talk to us about how you would defend the Bible.
Sure. So for New Testament manuscripts, so when we're talking about manuscripts, we're talking about like these pieces of parchment paper that archaeologists have been able to find different places. The New Testament has preserved more manuscripts than any other ancient work. On my research, we have about 5,800 completed or fragments of Greek manuscripts, 10,000 Latin manuscripts, and 9,300 manuscripts in various ancient languages. And the date in which those were written, as opposed to how the times of the events, we're talking about maybe 90 to 100 years, whereas other works of literature, Homer's Iliad, 500 years. That's the closest that we have to it being known. For Plato, 1,300 years before we have actual written manuscript of his work.
But we still ascribe that to him, and
we quote him like if it is. This is super accurate, and so the validity with that time kind of just helps back up everything that we believe in those manuscripts that we have.
I love that, and so I'll just take the Old Testament. It's interesting because a shepherd boy found am I saying it right? Qumran. The Qumran scrolls, aka the Dead Sea Scrolls. My boy was chilling, throwing rocks, and then he heard a clank, and then he was like, whoa, what was that clank? I just broke something. Come to find out, there are 11 caves down there. Found 1,050 scrolls. Yep. Now, here's the exciting part about the Dead Sea Scrolls. It basically gave validity to the Aleppo Codex, which was found 1,175 years later. Right? Or before. So they found the Aleppo Codex, and that was basically what we were using as our litmus test.
Sure.
And they're saying these are reliable. We have so many of them, even more than the Iliad, right?
Yep.
This is just verifying and gave us another 1,000 manuscripts to verify. And it said there was a 95% accuracy. So in 1,000 years of the writings, they were basically written and dated 1,000 years apart. Yep. There's only a 5% difference, and that was just clerical differences and spelling and things like that.
Because these are all being handwritten.
Yes. So you think about the Dead Sea Scrolls gave us, when you consider all together, that's over 17,000 manuscripts for the Old Testament that are written 1,000 years apart.
Every book of the Old Testament but Esther, I think, is what it had.
I think that's right.
It's insane when you think about it. And
so JD, you brought up the 95% accuracy. Yeah. And what about that 5%? That's one of the most common objections I hear to trusting the Bible. Is like, well, it's been translated so many times over so many thousands of years. There's so many mistakes in it. I think Bart Ehrman is a New Testament scholar, but he's an atheist. And he says that it's all myth and fake and made up and all these things. He points to, I think his quote is like, there's more discrepancies in the translated text than there are words in the text. And so he's trying to throw us into a place of confusion or doubt that we wouldn't trust the text. So why can we trust a text that's been translated so many times?
I think the 95% accuracy kind of debunks a lot of those conversations, but because I've heard very similar ones. The clerical mistakes are going to happen between languages, different people groups, different people in general. I'd put a comma where you may not put a comma because of my schooling background. So these 5% mistakes are definitely interesting to have conversations about.
None of the mistakes, though, go to Jesus's death and resurrection.
Right.
That's kind of the big kicker in all of this. They're
nothing
really
changes
minute.
with the core beliefs of Christianity. They're I've heard the numbers are different in the book of Numbers. Some of the numbers are different and things like that. Yeah. Some of these mistakes that I've heard people have conversations about, it doesn't affect anything that we believe. Yeah. Right. Even if it was a mistake.
Yeah. All the orthodox beliefs of Christianity are maintained in these manuscripts. And so one of the ways I've heard a lot of the discrepancies are the use of pronouns versus names. Yep. We could have 10 copies that say Jesus went up on the mountainside and then one that says he went up on the mountainside. Well, Jesus, that's consistent. It makes sense. And so because I think the benefit of this is that not only are the beliefs preserved, none of them are compromised in these differences, but the other thing is that we have so many copies that we can get a reliable source. That if there's a 5% difference between two copies, then it's I don't know exactly how to land that 5%. But if you have 5,800 copies.
And when you think about the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're all saying the same story from a different perspective, but they're all saying the same thing. The accuracy in between them is insane. And when you think of John was not one of the synoptic only because he didn't have any of the parables in it. But when you think about the similarities between the main crux of the Gospels. There are three different people saying the same exact thing. Yeah. It's just amazing when you think about it.
There's a great resource. It's a book by Elijah Hickson, Myths and Mistakes in the New Testament. It is a fantastic resource that goes over every single argued scripture and gives it the context around there. It's a really great resource because we're not going to hit them all today.
I want to shout out Christian Apologetics by Douglas Groothuis. I love this book. It's one of my favorites. And then Lee Strobel's Case for Christ, I'd say if you're an atheist that's struggling or or have a friend, reading, getting up on that book, he basically sought out to disprove Christianity and came to find out that it was accurate.
Yeah. I'll go for one then from Josh McDowell, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. It's a real thick, comprehensive thing that you can use more like a reference.
Yeah.
Like, don't get so intimidated. I got to read like a 900-page book. No, like it's a reference. Hey, what's the question that I'm dialoguing with somebody about? You can go find that one and study it and be more prepared to talk with them about it.
And another big one I think is Christianity versus science. I think that's a big one. And, and you might be listening. You're like, well, I never had that conversation. And that's okay. Personally, I think maybe I just encountered a lot of people, and this happened in college a lot, definitely. People who are feeling like you have to be either or. If you're for science, if you're for evolution, you're anti-gospel, you're anti-creationist. And I'm a young earth creationist who also believes that there is scientific proof to prove that creation was real. In fact, in the book I just shouted out, Christian Apologetics, there's an interesting quote. When you think about some of the, just some of the smartest people that we have when we think about scientists like Isaac Newton, Johannes Kepler, Galileo, it says they held to a theistic worldview that encouraged the study and development of creation. They did not view the Bible as inhibiting science, but as being compatible with the investigations of nature. So when we have scientists today who feel like it is in opposition, I don't agree with that, because there are facts, there are things that we can point to archaeologically. There are textual things. I mean, the Bible's used as a historical document for even people who don't believe that Jesus was a real person. Sure. They're still using the Old Testament as historical accurate and true.
Unfortunately, I think the early church did us a disservice with some of our Christian scientists that we had. Galileo and other, the Gregorian calendar was made by Christian monks. And it's like they're developing and that early church just got a little too scared of how fast some things were going, and we started stifling science.
Yeah,
because we got afraid. I think honestly they got a little afraid of how far that it was going, and that's the unfortunate. There's a great quote, and I have no clue who said it, but science trying to disprove God is like a mechanic trying to disprove Henry Ford ever lived. It's just two things that don't make sense. That science is trying to prove something spiritual,
right?
And they don't do that in any other respect. But for some reason, there is this odd fight that is happening between science and theology.
I think the point at which science starts to conflict with faith is when it is no longer science. It's dealing with questions that are more philosophical in nature. Sure. And so science itself doesn't prove or disprove God. And in fact, I would make arguments the more I learn about science, and I've heard people a lot smarter than me say this too, the more I learn about science, the more it points to evidence of a creator, of a designer, of an intelligent force behind the causes of the universe. And so I think it's when science tries to draw conclusions or make assumptions or assertions that are more philosophical in nature, God doesn't exist or there couldn't have been. And so I think it also became a cultural thing when, Darwin's Origin of Species, what are we going to teach in schools? And so that became this like conflict that was really more politically rooted. And what are we going to do in our schools? And so science wasn't really the issue there either. And so I think we have to separate some of that when we're dealing with this conversation. Sure. Is this really a scientific issue? Because I think the evidence in science doesn't inherently contradict anything that we have in the Bible.
It's interesting because I've always found that you have to have more faith to believe in science. Right? You know the phraseology ex nihilo, out of nothing comes something.
Yeah.
I mean, we have an answer for that. Science still doesn't have an answer for the Big Bang. And, it's interesting when you talk about science, I mean, it's just one of my passions. I really enjoy having conversations with scientists because I just feel like I'd love to to reconcile the differences in those. And so I found an article and it discussed how there was a Tyrannosaurus Rex found in Hell Creek, Montana. And they're looking up these old fossils of this dinosaur, and there's actually soft tissue that was preserved with red blood cells that, they previously stated dinosaurs are 65 million years old. This is stating that they're not even nearly, they're off by like 65 million, not 65 million, but it's an understanding that this world, as we learned in school, may not be as old as we thought. Me, myself being a young earth creationist, I believe that there's answers for the rock formations, the flood. There's sediments in the underneath the sea currently that we should have way more sediments just based off of the millions of years old. And it's just so interesting. There's a lot of answers in creationism that you'd be surprised about. And I just challenge you listening right now, if you're like, man, I've never even thought about the rock sediments and how that would inform my faith when it comes to creationism. I always thought that science was, they're all so smart. I can't even have a conversation with them. I challenge you, man, go check out some articles. I mean, do your own research. There's books, there's texts.
I was going to say, two great resources I found. There's a book. You guys almost quoted the exact title of the book, but it's I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they break down a lot of these concepts. Alan Parr's podcast, he has 2 different videos going through archaeological finds that back up the legitimacy of our text and the events that kind of surrounded them, and really, really great resources.
Yeah, I think when it comes to science, one of the points I generally make in these conversations is that science is progressing, right? Don't we know more now than we knew 100 years ago?
Yeah.
For example, like how big did we think the universe was 100 years ago? Now we have the James Webb Telescope, and now we can see into the distant recesses, and there's more galaxies today, and our understanding of the universe is so much greater. So if the method for carbon dating or the size of the universe has changed, our perspective on these things has changed over time, don't we expect then that it will change again? But the things that we're affirming about Christianity are historically consistent over thousands of years, and they're not changing. And so to rely on science is to say, I'm going to trust this moment in time, the information we have at this moment, as opposed to something that hasn't changed or wavered or had discrepancy, for more than 6,000 years, really,
They're
from
theories.
the beginning.
Yeah.
They're theories. I've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson kind of still explain this of like, these are theories still. Like we're still finding out new things, and there are still things that we cannot explain. We're still working on it. It's like, well, we have the answers.
Yeah.
So when I'm having these conversations, it could be about science, it could be with an atheist or somebody who grew up Catholic or all sorts of things. The point is generally not about science or even the text of Scripture. I always try to come back to who is Jesus,
Right?
Because that's the central issue of Christianity. Who is Jesus? Now, those other things might be a preliminary conversation to get to the person of Jesus, and so I don't want to discount them. But ultimately, where I want to get in the conversation is who is Jesus? Yeah. Because if they believe in that Jesus was a real person, okay, great. Did he die? Okay. Was he raised? There's usually a break point. What about the resurrection? So how do we look at that? I generally go to 1 Corinthians 15. It says that he appeared to more than 500 people over a 40-day period. Well, if they discount the Bible, then we'll have to go on that tangent and talk about the manuscripts and the conversation about that. But then, okay, was he resurrected? Okay, at that point, if you've got a resurrected person, you've got to come to the question of, well, who was this man? Like what that supernatural event requires a determination of what I believe about him. And so, Lord, Liar, a lunatic, C.S. Lewis, who was Jesus? Because if he's just a moral teacher, a prophet, a dude that lived, that never was raised, then you've come to your conclusion. But if he was raised, and if the evidence for the resurrection is worth believing, then it changes the conversation entirely, because then we're dealing with the deity of Jesus.
And when you're discussing the resurrection, I just find it interesting that they used, so the Bible talks about women being the first to even announce it. And during this time, women's words wouldn't be used in council. Like if you were if you were like, hey, listen, I need somebody to back my story, I need a corroborator, they wouldn't use a female. And it's interesting that they would use that as the crux for Mary Magdalene and them going to the tomb and having that conversation with the angel. It just wouldn't have been done that way if they're really trying to convince people. Then you have to think, all right, so we have that. Now you have people that have overnight become emboldened with the Spirit of God to go preach and get killed, knowing and willingly to go into hostile environments to preach this crazy story to, like you said, of a lunatic, right? I'm going to die for this. And then all these other people are getting excited. And now you have to disprove so many things when it comes to the resurrection of Christ that is actually interesting to hear somebody try to combat it.
Yeah. So there's I think it's the Evidence of the Resurrection. They pulled together all these articles, pulling from Christian and atheistic. And the conclusions of all the articles were that Jesus did die by Roman crucifixion. Jesus's disciples believed and were willing to die for that fact. And Jesus's tomb was and is empty. So something happened.
Nobody produced a body.
We cannot find it. And the other article, I think there was 10, but the other big one, and that's always been big on me, Paul's conversion. Paul's conversion does not make any sense. He had no reason to convert. He's literally killing Christians,
right?
And converts by himself. He's not with anybody else, and comes back and to be one of the founding fathers of our faith. Those become the cornerstone evidence that we can use throughout history to prove the accuracy of the scriptures.
You know who unpacks that really well is a guy named J. Warner Wallace. He does a lot in the area of apologetics. He has a website, Cold Case Christianity. He was a detective, and he solved cold cases like murders and stuff. And he was an atheist, but he started to take his principles of how do you prove something and how do you, beyond a reasonable doubt in a courtroom, take the evidence and prove a case. And so he took that and applied it to scripture. And I was just listening to one where he does it with the resurrection. And he starts to say, so there's like 7 options you could believe about what happened. Yeah. And he debunks all of them. And he says, it's most reasonable to believe that 500 people were willing to preserve this story that Jesus actually resurrected and appeared to them. They lived likely up to 30 or 40 years beyond that point for none of them to have wavered or to have disputed that, up to the point of death for many of them. A conspiracy theory, his point was really good. A conspiracy theory that involves that many people over that much period of time is not only improbable, it's literally impossible.
I agree with that. I mean, I think an overarching theme is that we're trying to have, we want you, if you're listening right now, to understand that there are facts that you can look up, you can research, there are books you can dig into. If you're having conversations about the Bible being real, Jesus' resurrection being real, obviously we believe these things, but basically having a defense for your faith, it's a core tenet of our faith as well, because we have to go and have conversations, evangelize, tell the world about Jesus. When you're telling the world about Jesus, inevitably you're going to find people that don't agree with you.
Yeah.
Otherwise evangelism would be really easy and we'd all be doing it all the time. Jesus is real. Oh, thanks for telling me, man. Appreciate it. It's not how it goes.
That's to me the craziest argument still, is that there's still sometimes that argument. I feel like you've done no homework if you say Jesus isn't real at all. He never lived as a person. There's at least 10 different non-Christian authors who mention the life of Jesus in their work. And they have no reason to mention him at all.
Let's debate on the deity of Jesus.
Sure.
Right? That's the conversation that most people at that level of understanding would have with you. Versus, was he a real person?
Yeah, I think the ones we've touched on are the ones that I've encountered most. The reliability of the New Testament, the historicity of the resurrection, and then the deity of Jesus. And I think if you establish the first two, that the Bible, the accounts we have in the Bible, in the Gospels, are accurate accounts of his life, that he was crucified by the Jews and the Romans because they believed that he was claiming to be the Son of God. Okay, so here's a man who claimed to be the Son of God. The reports or accounts of his life are accurate, and the resurrection did, in fact, happen and is historically provable. Well, if you're at that point, then the last one, I think, is actually not that difficult to convince somebody that he was, in fact, the Son of God. But that's why I think the ones that we've talked about, but there's so many, and I'm so grateful that God has gifted people to be able to write and to explore these things and to provide resources, because I think all of us are beneficiaries of those resources. Right. We're never going to know everything, and we're never going to be able to answer every question, but being willing to engage in the conversation and knowing that we have a reasonable faith. Like it's strong enough to stand up to questions.
Well, can I say, if you're listening right now and you thought maybe science wasn't a path for you, we need more Christians who want to pursue science,
Absolutely.
who want to pursue archaeology, because there's more stuff out there that you could be on the front lines. They're literally still finding things on sites that are just backing it up. And it's like, we don't have to be separate from, it's not an us and them. No, we need to be around in, just like we need to be in the arts, we need to be in the sciences as well.
Yeah, I just heard about this book, Signature in the Cell. And so through the like genetic coding, they're starting to discover more about who we are as humans and how we were made and how we came to be. And so there's a guy, Stephen Meyer, who has this book, Signature in the Cell, and he starts to unpack essentially the amount of code in one single cell is more than they ever has ever been placed in a single computer. And the code, like that's unbelievable that the
when you think
genetic
about the amount
human
of cells
code.
we have,
Right. I've heard the defense on the intricacy of the eye.
Right.
I've heard that.
Like it just doesn't make any sense that this could happen by accident.
Right.
Just the eye. Forget everything else. Just the eye doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. What was the Tetelestai one? The thing that we found. It was like inside of a cell. It's like a T-shaped cell inside of the humans, inside of a what's his name over. He did a whole like series on it.
Louis Giglio.
Giglio did it. Yes.
Yeah.
He did that passion like 7 years ago when I was
It's
there.
a while.
That's
Yeah.
why my memory is a little ragged. But
New baby too. That'll do that.
Yeah, he found basically he inside of a cell he found this chromosome, I think, and it was like it was in the shape of a cross, and he was saying how important that was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't find it, but he
Right.
shared the message about it. Just Louis.
Exactly.
Louis great, but I don't think he's like a genetic.
He's also got
yeah.
one about the cosmos and
yeah.
how they're singing God's praise. That's also really cool if you can find it online.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us here at Moment by Moment. Man, we could keep talking for hours. This is such a great topic,
Part
but
3?
we just want to encourage you to have conversations. We know, man, we don't know everything. We're just giving you some practical advice from how we have conversations, and I hope you were able to take something away. I hope you were encouraged to have that conversation with your family, your friend, your neighbor, whoever it is, whether you're at Thanksgiving dinner table, you're at the basketball court, or at the coffee shop. We hope that you are encouraged to have conversations. Don't forget, we're dropping episodes every single Monday. Thank you for joining us. Continue to share, continue to tell people about the Moment by Moment podcast, and don't forget to get your merch on our website. You guys have a great week, and we'll see you next Monday.